Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Genius Machines 2020 Virtual Summit. I'm Patrick Tucker, Technology Editor at Defense One, and it is my pleasure to kick off the next and final panel session, Scenarios for the Future of Artificial Intelligence in the Military and National Security. Today, we will take a look at the future of AI from some of the authors of the best recent books on the subject and recent reports on the future of AI in the US military and national security. Joining me today, Michael Kanan, Director of Operations, U.S. Air Force, MIT Artificial Intelligence Accelerator, speaking today as the author of a great new book, highly recommend, Tminus AI, Humanity's Countdown to Artificial Intelligence and the New Pursuit of Global Power. Dr. Margarita Koniev, Research Fellow, Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology, and Peter Singer, Strategist and Senior Fellow at New America, and author most recently of highly recommended fiction book, Burnin. So thank you so much for joining me, all of you. Really appreciate it. And let's very quickly look at some of the recent things that you've written and how they relate to what we're talking about today. Starting with you, Peter, your book, give us a very quick overview of what the novel is about and why it's of relevance to people that need to know about the future of AI in national security.
Sure, thank you. So Burnin is a new kind of book. It's a novel, but it's also a blend with nonfiction. So think of it as sneaking the veggies into the morning smoothie. It is a novel that's set in Washington, D.C. of the future, a techno thriller that follows the hunt for a terrorist. But along the way, you learn it's 304 different explanations and predictions of everything from how does AI work? What are the planned applications by entities that range from US military, police, Amazon, your child's toys, you name it. What are some of the dilemmas that we're going to have to face, both obvious ones like legal, ethical, to new dilemmas like things like algorithmic bias. And so by reading the novel, you walk away with an understanding of these issues without having to make your way through a boring presentation or long point. And what's most important is that those projections actually include 27 pages of research endnotes to document how they're real, that it's not just dreamed up. So Burnin is basically a way of giving you a visualization of the reality of what's to come with the forces of AI and automation.
Excellent, excellent. I read the book. It's awesome. Highly recommend it. And one of the great things about it is that it gets at so many of the different themes that the U.S. military right now is exploring with artificial intelligence, particularly human-machine teaming, but also looks at how AI is going to shape the environment in which we're all going to live, and of course where folks in the military are going to have to operate in the years ahead. So I think it's a good way to understand both what the future of AI is from the perspective of folks that are going to be encountering it in their daily life, maybe at home, but also at work and in an operational environment, but also how it changes the world around us. It's a very rich book, highly recommend. Michael, you are with the Air Force, but today you're speaking not on their behalf, speaking on behalf of yourself as an author of Tminus AI, also a highly recommended book. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, and to Genius Machines, GovExec, and the sponsors for putting this event together. I think first and most importantly, something we all must recognize, because we all have a role to play, is that AI is an extremely powerful tool. It has immense implications we must consider and evaluate carefully. It's a sharp instrument that shouldn't be callously wielded or just casually accepted, especially if it's in the wrong hands or when it's used for intentionally intrusive or oppressive purposes. They're serious issues, but they're issues for everyone. And there are some significant steps we can take to ensure AI is properly designed and implemented in both our personal lives and professional pursuits. But despite everything at risk, despite all the conversations, for most of us, AI remains shrouded by a cloud of mystery and misunderstanding, hidden behind complex technical terms, and then confused even further by the extravagant depictions in science fiction. The realities of AI and its implications are hard to decipher, but they're no less crucial to understand. So in the book, I explain the realities of AI from a human-oriented perspective that's easy to comprehend. through our collective history of innovation and technology, because the topic is truly multidisciplinary. You have to know a little bit about our own evolution, the development of language, the scales of numbers, both big and small, some basics of history, how a computer works, of course, how your own brain works. Then let's discuss what is AI. Because without context, it's the same circular conversation where we see it in society today. We too often speak above, past, below, around, and through one another. And after that, the big stuff, the global implications of AI and the cultural and national vulnerabilities exposed and the pressing issues squarely on the table. Let's call it like it is. AI has already become China's all-purpose tool to impose authoritarian influence around the world. Russia is weaponizing AI through its military systems and infamous aggressive efforts to disrupt democracy by whatever disinformation means possible. And other nations, America and like-minded ones. We're of course too awakening to these new realities, but ultimately the paths we think nations, corporations, society elect to follow echo loudly in most cases the political foundations and moral imperatives upon which we were formed. But in order to talk about any of those aspects in a meaningful way, we need all the legs to the tripod. And ultimately, much like Peter's book, we as humans learn best through storytelling. Storytelling about what makes us us. And my favorite books discuss the human experience. And for me, the human experience is best told through the lens of AI.
Okay, excellent. Again, I highly recommend this book if you want to understand an aspect of AI that only very recently have books begun to tackle, and that's the global geopolitical implications of it. All during the 90s and really going back decades, you could read all sorts of books that would explain things like information technology acceleration curves, and also like tutorials on how different labs were beginning to experiment with neural networks that sort of crudely resembled the cognitive process of human beings in a sort of infantile stage. But we're at the point where talking about the geopolitical implications of this technology is not only very timely and urgent, but in some senses a little bit overdue. We became fascinated and I think very secure in the idea that AI was going to be something that might be useful in the near term, and that kind of the idea of terrifying killer robots was however interesting, it was very unlikely, and we forgot all of the different ways that artificial intelligence as an extension of information technology is going to create real capitalistic economic advantages and open up a lot of opportunities for lots of actors to do lots of things outside of the comic book scenario. So I think it's a really timely conversation that you're having in the book. And finally, Margarita Koniev. Rita, can I call you Rita?
Absolutely.
Please tell us a little bit about Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology, because the point of this center, I think, is so important right now. And it kind of strikes at some of the same issues that Peter and Michael are striking in their scenario writing and in their fiction writing, but from a different perspective. So tell us a little bit about the center and your work.
Sure, of course. So the Center for Security and Emerging Technology is a university-based think tank. It's nonpartisan. It's independently funded, so we don't accept any funding from the US government or any other government. And really our goal is to provide evidence-based policy recommendations to the US government in order to ensure that the investments that the US government and the private sector here as well that are making in emerging technology and particularly AI are safe, secure, trustworthy, and beneficial and ethical, not only for the United States, but as well for the world more greatly writ large. And we have a few streams of research. Some of them look into AI talent, others look into hardware, semiconductors, issues like that. Some others look into specifically exploring what China is doing in AI. As we know, that's a big conversation, and a range range of other topics that we're, been looking at. But I've been leading our research on U.S. military applications of AI. And the last two reports that we just released this week have been, an undertaking that we've been working on for almost a year now, because we had a pretty comprehensive, robust vision that we wanted to, kind of going back to what you just said, there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding and misconceptions about what AI is going to be. And we have these ideas about killer robots, and we have these tensions about these disastrous implications, but we don't really have a lot of good data and an understanding of what exactly is being done by the US military in terms of its research and development efforts. So we wanted to understand first, what is the scope and the nature of DoD science and technology research that's related to autonomy and AI? Second, what are the military capabilities in specific that are that AI and autonomy promise to deliver? So we looked into things like speed, precision, coordination, lethality, and endurance. And third, what are the strategic effects of these investments, of these technological investments, and the capability enhancements that follow from them? So it's a kind of a three-part framework: technology, military capabilities, and strategic effects. And we divided that framework into two reports. The first is the budgetary assessment report that looks into the technology aspect, and the second is the strategic assessment that looks into how these technologies and investments advance those capabilities and the strategic effects they have in areas specifically looking into deterrence, military effectiveness, and US interoperability with allies. And I'm happy to discuss in more detail some of our cool, and on the one hand, we've seen a lot of cool findings. On the other hand, there were some alarming gaps that I think in an interesting way kind of augment and speak to the work that both Peter and Michael have been doing as well.
Yeah, I want to get to some of those gaps in our understanding or in our thinking about the actual implications of this technology. And two that strike me from some of your most recent reports: AI-related research efforts related to autonomy. Right now, the AI within the military that's not related to autonomy receives a relatively small share of science and technology funding compared to funding for autonomy. Is that, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. So we looked into research that's related to autonomy and research that's related to AI, and we tried to differentiate those two areas as much as possible. But of course, these are two areas of science that overlap inevitably. AI is meant to enable a lot of autonomous, automatic capabilities. But the thing about autonomy research in the US military is much of it is dedicated to embodied autonomy. So that's advancing autonomous capabilities within physical systems, as well as a lot of human-machine teaming. So if you think about it like that the majority of autonomy research is dedicated to greater autonomous capabilities in physical systems. And given this big overlap with AI research, you're really getting the sense that a lot of the money that is supposedly going to AI is going to AI that enables autonomous capabilities in physical systems like unmanned vehicles, drones, things like that. Much less is going into AI for non-embodied, so like software, really advanced, sophisticated algorithms. We're seeing much less stuff much less funding and investment being directed there. Not to say that it doesn't exist. Of course, there are a lot of really interesting initiatives happening on cyber defense operations, but when we're looking at that overlap, there really is a heavy, heavy emphasis on utilizing AI in physical systems, as opposed to some of this more cutting edge and perhaps like agenda setting, groundbreaking research in AI that the United States could really take on, and if it was to invest in it, could really make itself much more secure in the strategic competition going into the future by investing in this.
Yeah, so that's I think a sort of important gap where we're talking about artificial intelligence as this enormous change maker across so many areas of life, and the military, especially top-line leadership, are very anxious to embrace emerging technology and show their ability to do that. There's great importance in making that message really loud and clear to everyone, but there's this, it's kind of like a short-sightedness that you identify. And I want to get to whether or not that might be a huge problem. But first, Peter, one of the aspects that you just mentioned that's really top line for the US military right now, that's also plays kind of a central animating theme in your book, is that of human-machine teaming. And I don't want to give away the whole book, which you should read, but there's an FBI special agent named Laura Keegan, and she has to go about her very difficult work alongside an advanced police robot that is also looking to her to learn basically a lot of things about the way humans are supposed to operate, but learns in a way that is fundamentally different from the way a regular partner would learn. So Peter, I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about that theme and what, based on current trends in AI, led you to write it the way that you did.
So it's a couple of things, and they actually connect back to what Rita was bringing up. The first is we don't have to worry about giving it away. You know, every book has underlying themes. So, you know, Moby Dick is not really a story about a hunt for the whale and whether he gets it or not. And it's the same thing with Burnin. There's a couple of core themes that we try and carry through besides these examples of applications. One is that we framed the impact of AI the wrong way, and that we're actually on the 100-year anniversary of the creation of the word robot itself. It was in a play, RUR, 1920, and ever since that concept, which was they took the Czech word for servitude and used it to describe this new kind of character that was a mechanical servant that wised up and then rised up against its human masters. And that's colored not just science fiction, but it's also frankly colored the way we talk and think about it in the real world. I mean, poor Michael, I can't imagine how many meetings he's had to deal with the killer robots issue in terms of real world policy. And it's been debated in terms of the UN or the like, when really what we're going through is not a revolt of the machines, but a industrial style revolution. And it links back to what Rita was talking about, is that therefore, if you imagine it more like the steam engine or computers, it already starts to surround us and will even more. It will come in lots of different forms. It will be both physical, and it might be a robotic system itself, or it might be how a manned system becomes more robotic. So think about what's happening with driverless cars. It might also be woven through your buildings, whether it's a smart military base, a Navy ship, or your apartment. So that's one core theme of it. The second is the core centrality of you're not going to fight against this revolution. It's going to happen. It's more about how do you deal with it, and how do you deal with it in everything from the political effects of it to your own planned applications of it. And at the core of this is figuring out the dilemmas of human-machine teaming. And human-machine teaming comes in lots of different forms, and so we use the book to illustrate that. But at the core of it is figuring out this all-important issue of trust. And there was a really great data point in Rita's report that came out that I just thought was so telling. She found that, so I'm reading from it to your words, so I don't get it wrong. It's 18 out of 789 US military research components related to autonomy, and only 11 out of 287 research components related to AI even use the word trust. And yet trust is the key in everything from us actually buying it, to using it effectively the right way, to dealing with the underlying dilemmas that it presents, whether they're legal, ethical dilemmas, to new kinds of cybersecurity threats, all come out of the engineering definition of the word trust, which is, does it work? Not do I like it, but does it work the way that I expect? And so kind of to bring this back full circle is that we use the package of a novel, but weave in these real world issues and these two core themes of how do we deal with an industrial revolution and also how do we figure out human machine teaming are, to me, just some of the biggest both national political questions, but also military questions that go from the tactical layer to the doctrine to the strategy to how we rethink acquisitions, you name it. How do you deal with the industrial revolution that we're living, working, and fighting through? And second, what does that form look like of human machine teaming?
So thank you for bringing up this play. I love this play, Rawson's Universal Robots by Karl Čapek. It was a great playwright, Czechoslovakian playwright, who coined this term. I think it's very useful to check out if you want to understand the cultural history of some of the archetypes that animate our discussion of what is artificial intelligence and robots. And it's 3 acts. And in the first one, Rawson, he's this sort of like Elon Musk-esque inventor, creates a new form of being that are the robots. And first, it results in tremendous wealth for him. In the second act, they destroy the economy, and in the third act, guess what they do? Guess what the robots do in the third act? And it's true. In so many ways, we were inventing the destruction of humanity in the face of robots long before we were getting anywhere close to actually inventing robots, and I think that's so telling. But Michael, let me go to you and bring back that point. So trust, we all understand as something that's incredibly important between operators and incredibly important between a commander and the person serving under that commander. It's an area where the U.S. military recognizes that it's important, but they're underinvesting compared to more straightforward investments in autonomy. I wonder if you can contrast the way the U.S. military talks about the need for trust as part of a robot serving a role or an AI serving a role in a subordinate operator scenario versus the way Chinese or Russian military officials might think of that. Is the trust problem, how is it different in those 3 settings between Russia, China, and the United States?
This is a great topic. So let's peel this onion back and start at 2 points, or what we'll deem as perhaps tenets, when trying to understand AI to the point in which we can help cultivate trust. First, the term artificial intelligence is so overused, misunderstood, and broad to the point it's meaningless. Frankly, most tech terms, DevOps, automation, etc. So the question is, how do we address that? The second is recognizing the fact, and this is academic, that there is not yet a shared or prevailing and clear and convincing notion of trust in general. So we have a difficult uphill battle. I don't mean this to be pedantic, but if you don't address both of these things, you'll never have a workforce ready to experiment and, harder yet, adopt machine learning applications in their everyday lives or in military operations. Adoption is the first step towards this esoteric topic of trust. So let's think about what are things we trust. Ultimately, it's an interesting concept, and I highly doubt there's anyone watching this that knows everything about a lot of stuff we trust in everyday life, like cars. Certainly, we have mechanics who can build a car from the ground up, but does that make them great drivers? Or vice versa, there are plenty of great drivers that can build a car. If they could, they can't code the software in each of our cars as well. Or why do I believe I'll wake up in the morning tomorrow? I believe that. I certainly hope so. There's no reason to. Or, gravity affects us at an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, but not everyone can unpack Newtonian classical mechanics, and fewer can converse about quantum reality or Everett's many worlds interpretation. Or everyone in quarantine right now. I'm going somewhere with these examples because examples are what's important, and the difference that's in strategic competition at the moment. We're all in quarantine, and I think of, could you build a microwave? How about an oven? Or the Instapot in my kitchen that I use, which I'm simultaneously afraid of because it's a bomb. Simply put, we trust a lot of things we can't necessarily explain every aspect of. So it begs the question, why do we trust these things? Why do we trust cars? We trust cars because we use them. We know when something is wrong. Most of the time, we have established lanes in the road, pun intended. We know how they can be used for bad. We know how they can be used for good. We experience them. And that's where organizations are failing. And in this case, nation states are accelerating because they're putting them into application. They're experiencing using them. And we, as humans, want to say, well, I want to explain why an AI or why a human made that choice. I'm going to make this very simple as we anthropomorphize the word explainability when it comes to artificial intelligence. If I was, any of us are sitting on chairs right now. If we had a conversation, I said, how do you know that's a chair? After maybe 15 minutes, you really get down to the root cause. You'd say, well, after 30 years of life, I've sat on a lot of chairs. I've seen a lot of chairs. I'm pretty convinced that's a chair. Artificial intelligence would say the exact same thing if you could ask it. So you take a step back and get to more practical, pragmatic aspects of what does the data look like in which I am collecting in order to get to whatever express end state, whether that is using it in military operations or picking out a new customer and customer retention management for a company or something. Some of these other countries don't necessarily have the same rules on data and they can access more. And vis-a-vis, there are times where that artificial intelligence or that application is more performant to their ends. So I think what the difference is right now is we need to dive in more, not admire what a world looks like with artificial intelligence, but experience a world with that. And I think getting back to some pragmatism and framing AI problems and understanding it is what we need to do. It's simple. It labels things. It tells you what they are, what they aren't, and it's all used to discover human patterns at the end of the day. It's just code that doesn't need explicit direction to do so. And sometimes we make a mountain out of what is essentially a molehill.
Well, I think you bring up something that's very important. When we talk about China or Russia, these are two autocratic countries that are sitting on now vast amounts of potentially useful data to train any wide variety of different narrow AI programs to meet a certain function because they have complete dominion over all digital information that's collected. The government has complete dominion over all digital information collected in that country. So in Moscow, for instance, there's closed circuit television kind of across the entire urban landscape, and all of that information is useful to the government. In China, it's now very widely known the amount of digital information, including facial recognition and just closed circuit television imagery that is available to the government in order to train very advanced algorithms on those particular problems, which is recognizing specific people. And because of the way those countries are set up, they also experience, I think it's safe to say, a much lower cost for false positives. If you detain someone if the government detains someone in China that they shouldn't have detained because of a bad output of a facial recognition algorithm, then the cost to the government is relatively small compared to the cost that it would be for a domestic municipal police department in the United States. And not to say that there isn't reform necessary, but that cost-benefit ratio for using lots of data and also the availability of that data, that suggests that there's quite a contrast there between those three systems. So I wonder, Peter, if you might get into that a little bit. Is there, in terms of just the availability of data, does our democratic way of life put us at a disadvantage in terms of the AI competition?
This is a great question. We cannot keep trying to fit square pegs into round holes. It's time to carve out some new round holes every once in a while. There are dilemmas and topics that we really need to address at the moment. Let's do a thought experiment, if you will. Largely speaking, us as society and the United States government says, let commercial lead that. Commercial, and nobody touches our commercial market, right? So I want to commend what commercial companies are doing with their ethics boards and everything else. But let's say we're all in that room. We want to be ethical and moral and everything else using artificial intelligence, right? So we're at one of these big boards And I guarantee in that room, within the first 3 minutes, when you're trying to do right with artificial intelligence, which is driven by the access to data that's representative of the problem you're trying to solve, we would immediately start saying something like this. You know how that whole idea, you're an apple, I'm a droid, I'm a green text, you're a blue text? Well, then the AIs we're developing, we should share more data, which is intellectual property at the end of the day. So within, you know, our Western society of capitalism and the way that the United States is run, in that room on that ethics board is Peter, who is an incredibly talented attorney out of Stanford Law or NYU or something like that. And he sits back and he says, wait, hold on a second. See, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholder. And you can't technically do that, right? So it makes an interesting dilemma and only highlights why it is so crucial for representative democracies to be a part of the conversation, because our shareholder is everyone. I think that's interesting. And the other last point is you do want more data at the end of the day. And it's a slippery slope. Very quickly, you can find yourself saying, well, if only I had that locational data. But now we have to ask the question, does that fit our society, our views of human dignity, rights to liberty and freedom and privacy and all the rest? That conversation, I think, is special. It's what makes us different. At the same time, that conversation doesn't happen anywhere else. So when it's just one platform like WeChat with every piece of data possible, well, of course, in the short term, they will be perhaps more performant at whatever mission that they want to do or whatever aim that they have. But in the long term, I hope that we could get to a better intellectual foundation where we could make the argument, hey, hold on a second. We can still do well by doing good. And I think that's nuanced in 2020.
I mean, to take that to Peter, do our democratic norms disadvantage us in a competition to better utilize these new tools?
I don't think so. Basically, I think we need to lay it out that there are two very competing visions about the application of AI into our society. And that's, to put it bluntly, that's the actual Cold War. When you hear the term, you know, it's not a competition of who gets the most AI, you know, akin to missiles or the best AI. It's, in my mind, it's two very different visions. There is the vision out of Beijing, which is they've pre-chosen their state champions of corporations and provide support to them both domestically and in their external business. It's aligned with foreign aid and the like. But the deal is that those champions have to provide data to the government and each other in order to it's a highly centralized model ultimately where you will have mass collection, and that mass collection is all dedicated at the end of the day to the purpose of what they would describe as public security, but it's really about regime survival. And so, you know, collection of everything from whether you're buying diapers to how long you play video games, and then all of that information drilling down into a single social credit system score that will be used to influence your behavior, and that connecting then to both rewards and punishments. So for example, if you don't have a sufficient score, it will affect everything from whether you get a bed on an overnight train to, it's actually starting to be woven into not just job applications, but internet dating. So if you don't have a good score in the eyes of the government based off of an all-seeing tracking of you, you may not get matched. Now, we have another model, which is just the same amount of collection. We are collecting everything from whether you buy diapers to how long you play video games and the like. But we do not have the kind of enforced information sharing, and you have competition between those different companies that are each engaging in that kind of collection. So it's primarily about a for-profit model. These are the two visions that are basically breaking out. Now, there's another layer to that, which is, okay, how does this apply to military operations? And we're still, you know, seeing that work out. China's vision, longer conversation around that. So the U.S. military has not figured out how is it going to weave AI and automation overall into a new doctrine With China, it's moving from information-focused warfare to intelligenceation focused. There's very different meanings to that. I feel like we're still kind of halfway there too. That's the competition. And I think what's important is not just developing our own systems and control, but again, the parallel to the Cold War is that you have a push to expand that vision. So you see, for example, our data showed at least 36 other countries have met with China about implementing its vision of AI in terms of social control. And they range from, the expected ones like a Russia, like a Cuba, to maybe ones that are less expected, like some of these, we previously described them in the Cold War as third world. Now it's basically states that are kind of caught in the middle, but it even includes some that are within the Turkeys of the world, the authoritarian democracies of the world. Serbia had a meeting with them. So that's one part of this that we need to pay attention to. The other, going back to the military aspect of it, is not only how are we going to implement these technologies into the US military and what's the right doctrine for them and the like, but also what does that look like in relation to our allies? And how do we build up, can we have integration with them if we're operating with a completely different set of technology? And not just the technology, it's not just like, Link 16, it's like a completely different vision of war. And so what does this look like for not just us, but our allies?
I think that's a great point. And we are very rapidly, I'm afraid, running out of time. But before we go, I want to do like a lightning round with everybody real quick and condense your thoughts into something that is very small. In a couple words, what is the worst case scenario for AI in the United States in the next 10 years? And in as few words as possible, what's one thing, one step that policymakers now could take to hopefully avoid it? And I'll start with you, Rita. Again, speaking on behalf of yourself, not necessarily the center.
Worst case scenario I think about a lot is premature deployment of technologies whose vulnerabilities we don't sufficiently understand and don't know how to operate correctly, and that leading to unintended escalation or accidents.
So don't do that.
Huh?
So don't do that.
Yeah, I mean that.
Yeah.
Oh, what's the advice? To not fall for the race for the bottom, to not fall to the pressure to field early. Definitely experiment and consider experimenting under operational conditions, but absolutely do not. Faster is not necessarily better in this account.
Okay, awesome. Peter.
So wrote a book on the worst case scenario on the civilian side. So, I'll leave it at that. We lay out what does it mean to not handle well an industrial revolution, to what does it mean to have critical infrastructure that is wildly vulnerable. Now, the key with Burnin and this larger project of useful fiction is that it's not a work of prediction. It's meant as a work of explanation and prevention. So it doesn't have to happen. On the military side, my concern is the parallel of the British in the 1920s and 30s who invented the tank and the aircraft carrier, did some amazing wargaming and testing with it, but chose not to implement the changes that they recognized because of their own internal, it was both military culture, there were lots of reasons, but basically the Blitzkrieg was not a mystery to them. Arguably they invented it, certainly key elements of it. They just weren't willing to implement it, and then they paid the price. And I worry about the parallels for the US military for that.
Experience is an interesting thing when it comes to AI. The most experienced and strategic thinker probably doesn't look like you, probably is younger than the proverbial boardroom. I think things need to change in that aspect. Our focus now must be to openly address from a point of intellectual and educated foundation the current realities of AI, so we can ensure to the best of our abilities that's implemented only in ways consistent with our fundamental beliefs. And ideally, those deciding that, those voices are informed, or at least generally aware of the conflicts and potential compromises we face happening today in society. The first words of Tminus AI is the countdown to artificial intelligence is over. My fear is that one day those who look back upon these times should not be left wishing our eyes had been more open on this topic, or call this generation the great nap.
Okay, that's it. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. Do check out their work. Rita's very recently wrote for Defense One a great piece on that trust problem. Check out their reports that are directly related to military adoption of artificial intelligence and where there's gaps, and also check out the books. And then when you're done with that, read Rossum's Universal Robots by Carl Capek. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. And it's coming up on the 100-year anniversary of the robot. And we're still have much further to go in terms of figuring out some of these issues. But thank you so much, Rita, Michael, and Peter, for helping me understand a little bit where we're going. And thank you all for tuning in. We hope to see you again in the spring.